Welcome to the Workflow Show. This is episode 304.
Marquis.
That may mean absolutely nothing to you, but by the end of this podcast, you will be familiar both with Marquis, one of our software vendor partners par excellence, and
But it's not French, though. It's not Marquis. It's Marquis.
Well, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
There's a backstory there.
Okay.
We're joined today by Daniel Faulkner. Daniel is based in Nashville. He is the U.S. rep and main dude for Marquis Software. And for our listeners to get a frame of reference, Marquis starts to get very important with their product lines if you are using Avid products. And so today we're going to talk about what their software does and how it can help your workflow if you're using Media Composer, if you're using Avid's ISIS storage systems, if you're trying to implement third-party systems with an Avid NLE environment. They have a lot of very neat stuff. I've known Daniel for a number of years now. We've been plotting World of Domination in the background here this whole time.
Nick never lets me in on these things. These world domination
You're one
plots.
of the new guys at Chesapeake, man. I mean, maybe we've known you for a long time, but you're recently in the fold. You haven't crossed through the seventh gate of your initiation process.
That's right. I'm still at gate 4 or 5, somewhere around there.
You
so,
know, we haven't made him put on the robe and go through, like, the dark hallway with dudes with candles.
Right. Yeah. No, I haven't seen that. I didn't even know about that. Thank you. So I have that to look forward to.
It's basically like the last episode of True Detective, where he's in that like caves and there's
all those
vines and weird skulls and dudes with axes.
Awesome.
That's right.
So Daniel,
Yes.
tell us about yourself, sir. Tell us about you and the history of Marquis and why it's called that and not Marquis.
You really want to start out on a very exciting note, introducing myself. Hopefully people don't fall asleep straight away. But I've been with Marquis for about 8 years now, and the company's about 12 to 15 years old. And started out working for actually SGL, doing support for those guys, working for a reseller here in Nashville.
And for our listeners who don't know SGL, SGL makes kind of some high-end and kind of expensive tape archive software. They manage tape libraries in the archive space. They have some very big installs. And it's largely what Avid environments have been oriented around if you're doing a big tape archive system with Avid.
Right.
Is that not correct, Daniel?
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct. And so working for a reseller here in Nashville, selling all different types of solutions. And we were on a install, or whatever you want to call it, in Bogota, Colombia. I can't go into too much detail about that.
It was for the drug lords, obviously, then?
Well, we won't go there, but
I think I just took it there.
You did, yeah. Well, I'm taking it back. And so we met...
Look, Jason Whetstone has a little red dot on his forehead.
So we met the founder of Marquis he was there for a similar reason.
He was running guns for the Colombians at the time.
Similar, chasing us. And they wanted to work with a reseller to take on both the sales and support. So we did that for a number of years. I started out in the support role, and then about 4 years ago, moved into the business development role, and have been doing so ever since. And so we've had products that move media and metadata around different environments for about 12 years, very unique products that we'll jump into. So yeah, I've been in the industry for about 9 years, and I didn't graduate grade school with a plan of working for Marquis Broadcast, but here we are, and I'm happy to be here, and providing solutions for these challenging workflows is pretty exciting in a geeky, nerdy way, as we like to say.
I think we all kind of feel that way here as well.
And so Marquis is a British firm founded in the UK. Tell us a little bit about the company, its background, their CEO and his background, because obviously it ties into your guys' expertise quite a bit.
Yeah. Our founder was ex-Avid, and our CEO or chairman, Peter Davis, he used to run Avid Europe. I might say in the glory days in the 90s, So he was a big wig there. And so the company's been around for about 15 years. And I think their first project was to move files in and out of Avid environment to a Grass Valley environment. And there was just Avid came to the CEO at the time, Granby Patrick, and said, "Hey, you're a pretty smart guy. Can you create some software to do this?" And it was really a piggyback off of Transfer Manager because Transfer Manager couldn't do that.
Sounds like
And so,
that was a broadcast environment, most likely. They had a
yes,
Grass
Yeah.
Valley, video IT
Yep.
infrastructure, and they needed to be able to send files from Media Composer to like playout servers or
yes.
newsroom management system or something like that.
Yeah, for ingest on the Grass Valley system, and
Mm-hmm.
ultimately edit and finishing on the Avid system, and then playback or play out back
Yep.
on the Grass Valley system. So really the round trip of the media files, and as you guys rightfully know, a lot of our customers today have and want to have best of breed products. So they want the best ingest, they want the best play out MAM editing system, and most of the time those are all from different vendors. And so who have
Hmm.
different wrappers, formats, what have you. And so the software that initially was created for that one project has evolved into a larger software toolkit to be able to move those media files back and forth seamlessly and efficiently so that they can all play nice together. And you can use those best of breed products that have the super nice UIs and easy to work with, and you don't have to worry about the background processes of how these files get to from location X to location Y.
And you mentioned Transfer Manager. That's the Avid tool that lets you basically
Yes,
send files out of Media Composer. It's a separate app from Media Composer itself, correct?
it's an Avid product that it enables them to get files at a limited fashion, I might add, in and out of the Avid world. And so, would they put a lot of emphasis on that product to get files out of their system? I can't speak to that. I can only hint to that.
Well,
Um,
okay, and this brings up an interesting point that some people may be confused with. Like, for folks who are used to Final Cut 7 and its lineage, or the
Mm-hmm.
Adobe Premiere editing product and kind of its
mhm,
whole philosophy, we're making it sound like with Avid, there's these sort of maybe somewhat self-imposed roadblocks to easily getting files in and out.
Yeah,
And
I
I
mean,
think
if I'm working in Final Cut 7 or Premiere or even Final Cut 10, I just do an import and it's there, right?
right, it's wide
or
open.
export, and we're using very standard formats, and those software developers who make those nonlinear editors kind of go out of their way to expose the guts of, for instance, their project file formats, so it's easy to integrate with it and have plugins. Or
Hmm.
so, Daniel, you tell us, what's the reality in the Avid worldview? Feel free to be politically correct, but it generally is a little different on the Avid side, would you say?
Yeah, historically, Avid's been, closed off, kind of their own little silo, their own little ecosystem. And so it's in the last few years they have made claims and are most likely pushing towards to being more open. However, that hasn't truthfully happened yet, because it's still difficult to, even with their toolkits, to get files in and out of their environments in a very efficient manner. A lot of people still, and we used to actually in the early days, we relied on Transfer Manager to get media and metadata in and out of the Avid environment. And we saw straight away that that was not a great way to go forward because there was limitations with codec support, reliability of the Transfer Manager, and as far as speed is concerned. And so we create our own engine to do effectively what Transfer Manager is trying to do. And we have a very wide range of codec support. We're very fast and very efficient.
And I think, I was just gonna say, I mean, to be fair, right? You look at like, Avid's been around, I think, really even since the '80s. They had NLE technology, and then really came into their own in the '90s. And
Right.
given that, first of all, just computer-based desktop nonlinear editing was much newer then. Lots of people were still doing a lot of tape to tape editing workflows at that point. I know when I was in college in the mid '90s, I started college off with, tape-to-tape U-matic linear editing, and by the time I was out, we were playing around with Avid stuff. And so it was a newer set of technologies then. And I think at that point in time, if you were the type of customer with the budget to buy this type of digital editing technology and the rest of the ecosystem that Avid had, getting everything from a single vendor, from a supportability standpoint, made a lot of sense.
It's huge.
Very fair. I mean, very fair to think that you don't want to stitch together your solution. Frankly, there just weren't as many players in the space at that point. It was a more nascent set of technologies. And what's obviously happened in the last 25 plus years is that this space has exploded. IT has exploded. The utilization of IT technologies through video workflows throughout all points, storage, workflow management, you name it, has exploded.
Yep.
You have 50 times as many providers in the space. And people kind of take for granted that you can stitch things from one vendor together with things from another vendor and just make it work. But the reality is Avid still maintains a somewhat vertical arrangement. And it's certainly always been a little easier to, if you're using Avid Media Composer as your editing software, to use Avid's storage, what used to be just the Unity system and now is called Unity ISIS, and then Avid's production asset management and media asset management platforms that are interchangeably called Interplay PAM and Interplay MAM, and Avid's broadcast servers, and you go on and on and on. And so that's why, to me, because we've always had at Chesapeake this idea that we want to be able to pick and choose the vendors that we want to work with. We want to be able to say, oh, you like that NLE, but this is the storage that we think you should have. But, oh, look, this is the MAM you're using. We've always prided ourselves on kind of building the solutions ourselves and picking from the best of class categories.
And what best fits the customer's, needs and budget. And
absolutely. And the reality is people like editing in Avid. It's the main draw to Avid's platform that they like the editor. And that is perfectly fair and perfectly reasonable. But the fact that the decision an editor makes could then have such impact over like $100,000, $300,000, $1 million worth of the rest of your infrastructure, that's kind of not how we like to operate. And so that's why, to me, you guys were a very interesting find, in the sea of vendors. And, anyone can see when they go to NAB and just count how many thousands of booths there are or whatever. You were a really interesting find because with Avid, having you as a partner gave us the flexibility to give people the editor that they wanted, but maybe have more flexibility over some of the other aspects of their infrastructure. Now, just get this out of the way, Daniel. What does Marquis mean, and why is it not pronounced Marquis?
It's not Marquis. The company's British, and just where we got our namesake from, the founder of Marquis, his father, when he found out that him and his mother were going to have a baby boy, he went out to the local pub and he got really, really drunk and actually got kicked out.
This is actually a more extensive version of this story than I've heard before.
Oh.
Yeah. So you can edit what you want, but when he was looking up from the concrete after being thrown out, he just looked up and saw that the pub he was in was called the Granby of Marquis. And so he thought, well, I'll name my firstborn Granby. And so Granby, who is the founder of Marquis, he obviously knows that story from probably before he could could
Wow,
talk.
that is a pretty awesome story.
And so as you could, see what's coming, he, when he started the company, he thought, well, I'll finish that little cycle off and name the company Marquis after that same pub. So as luck would have it, a British company named after a pub for really no apparent reason other than a father getting kicked out for being too drunk one night. So
that's so
here
much.
we are.
That's so much cooler than Chesapeake Systems. I just have to say, people are like, Chesapeake Systems, does that have something to do with that bay? Are you located in Virginia? And I'm like,
are you
well,
in the
yes
water?
And no, and we don't sell crabs or other seafood products. Don't come to us for your Maryland rockfish needs.
We're not going to work on your boat.
So Well, you guys have a very interesting story, and it is a very unique niche. Let's get into talking about some of the products that you guys have, because there's kind of a handful of them.
Right.
Let's start, kind of a little more basic, and we'll work our way to more complex. Let's start with project parking and sequence parking, because these, to me, if you are in an Avid environment on Avid storage, if you've got an ISIS, and you know, first of all, that ISIS is not necessarily the cheapest storage system, dollar per terabyte wise, that you can buy, and you're looking to either bounce stuff off to a tape archive, you want to have tier 2.
It's going to fill up eventually, right?
It's going to fill up. People fill their ISIS all the time. And if you want to have like a tier 2, that's like a file server, that's less expensive, dollar per terabyte wise, that you're not really using for production purposes, but it's just kind of a storage bin. Or you have a tape library and you kind of need a cache location to shift stuff to. Project parking, in my mind, becomes like a no-brainer. So Daniel, explain it to our listeners, please.
I would be excited to. So project parking, as you said, is a product that really, lets you take advantage and really manage your valuable edit shared storage, because, you've got, depending on what size of storage you have, whether it's 32 terabytes or 200 terabytes, you're going to fill it up. It's the nature of the beast. File sizes are getting bigger. People want to keep their storage online and accessible for longer, and so that space gets filled up quickly. And most of our clients work at a project per project basis. They're working, today's project, tomorrow's project, and so there was really no easy way to archive at that same level. So project parking actually branched out of sequence parking, and I'll get to that in a minute. But project parking can essentially take all the media and metadata associated with your current project, bundle it all together, because the files are most likely scattered amongst the ISIS and the metadata is in different places. So it's a great way to bundle that all together and make a snapshot or a backup of that project in a nice organized folder structure, and provide you with a safe, reliable backup.
It might behoove us to kind of talk a little bit about ISIS, Avid Storage System, specifically, because you said you might have stuff all over your ISIS.
Yeah, what does that mean exactly?
I mean, because let me, just say, for folks that use a file server, a NAS for their production storage, folks that use a SAN for their production storage, like StoreNext or Xsan,
Right.
A lot of the time it's a single share or a single volume or drive that everyone is mounting, and it's all kind of organized as a single thing. Granted, you have subdirectories and you have an organizational structure there, but it's one volume. You're implying that ISIS is a little different. Yes, this is like the most leading question in the entire world.
Yes.
But maybe you can talk a little bit about how ISIS is different in terms of its organization, how you admin it, and how you as a user are interacting with subsets of its storage space.
Okay. Well, yeah, ISIS is normally broken down into multiple volumes or workspaces for different departments. I believe it's recommended to have 8 to 10 workspaces, and a lot of times those are for, in the broadcast realm, there'll be workspaces with names such as feeds or news or sports or, what have you, whatever department you want to create.
They could be for different episodes of a show, different programs, different series that you work on, different users could have their own workspaces.
Maybe like audio, video, graphics kind of thing.
Yes, absolutely. And so the idea is your media goes into your workspace. However, the greater idea is it's shared storage. And so some of the secret sauce that Avid has with their storage, and I think one of the main reasons it's so valuable, is the ability to share that media, so you don't have to duplicate it or what have you.
Because multiple people can hit each workspace, so it's not like a workspace is locked to an individual user. And one of the neat functions of a workspace is that if you have projects that are located on these workspaces on the shared storage ISIS system, and you open up a bin, Media Composer and ISIS work together to do a system called bin locking, so different people can't corrupt the bins within their Avid projects. And it bears stating that a bin in an Avid project tends to be a more robust entity than what you might think of as a bin in a Premiere Pro
Like
or
in
a Final Cut
yeah.
project. A bin in an Avid project, because it contains both sequences and clips, is almost more like a Final Cut 7 or a Premiere Pro
Right.
project file
Like a
in and
whole
of
project
itself.
file. Yeah.
And then an Avid project file is almost more like a higher level of organization or structure than you even really have in Final Cut, or
it's
even
like a campaign or something with a
exactly.
larger container than project.
You could have an Avid project file that's
Yeah.
really for an entire series, and different
Sure.
episodes of the series are divided into individual bins, each with their own sequences and clips, as well as generic bins for like B-roll for the whole series, or your opening credits sequence stuff, or closing, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So it's inherently a bit more, I wouldn't say bifurcated because it's more than two, but more dispersed of a way of storing stuff than you tend to have in a file locking stand like StoreNext, or if you have a NAS that's a single share that everybody's hitting. And it's cool because you can on the fly, as an admin of your ISIS, add more space to an individual workspace or subtract space from a workspace.
Yeah, so they're
you have a
kind
little
of
slider
dynamically changing.
and that's very different than a lot of other
It is.
systems. It makes
It's very
ISIS
cool.
very slick. It's a very slick admin environment. The software for the admin side is very nice. It's really the
Pretty
guts of
straightforward,
the
yeah.
system in many ways.
Mhm.
But everything's locked in there. You tend to fill these workspaces up, or you fill the whole system up, so you can't carve out any more workspaces, and all of your existing workspaces are full. And
Right.
so how does project parking come into play? What does it look like from an infrastructure standpoint, and then what's kind of the usage of it look like on a day-to-day basis?
Well, from the infrastructure point of view, is there's not a really easy way. Like I said earlier, these editors are working in a project per project basis. There's not a real easy way to see, because it's a lot of metadata, a lot of references to this media, and being able to see really how big your projects are, or where the media lives, because it can live just about any workspace, because it's essentially references. There's not a great way within Avid to understand these projects and who's taking up more space, because it's very valuable space. And so
Are you
within
saying that Avid editors are sometimes less than totally organized?
I just think us as a human race is less than totally organized, but yes, I would
Very
say
much
so.
focused on getting the project done, and
Yeah, they're
whatever.
doing what they don't need to worry about organizing,
Right.
their media, and worrying about if there's enough space. There's typically, not always, but somebody there called a media manager that has that major concern.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, most of the time your editors don't want to be managing space. They just want to be editing.
Yeah, and the editors' bosses don't want their editors to do that either.
Exactly.
So talk about some of the analytical functions that the project parking software has, because I know that's kind of usually the first thing someone does. Oh, and say, like, how is project parking even installed? Where does it live? Does it live on an
Right.
editing system? Does it live on a server?
Right. So project parking really can be installed on a PC that has storage connectivity. So as long as because with ISIS you have to have an ISIS client that gives you the ability to mount these volumes or workspaces. And so project parking would be installed on a PC. It could be an editor, or it could be just a light basic PC that has the connectivity to the ISIS storage.
And when you
so
say PC, you mean a Windows PC, because it is
Windows
Windows
PC.
software, right? Got it.
That's correct. That's correct. And so with that, we would have access to all the project files and by project files, all the different files that the editors work on, which contain all the references and information about that project and the media that it references. And so project parking would look at those files and keep track of all those references.
So it actually scans the project files first.
To see what media is being used where.
Yes, to see what those references to the media, to take reference of all of that. So
And then it can actually show you how much space a particular project is using.
Right, right. Because one of my customers came to me at NAB several years ago saying we were talking about this, and he said, "Well, I do that too. I can tell how big my projects are, but it's me going into Avid, selecting the project, selecting delete, and Avid would come up with an interface saying, 'Are you sure you're getting ready to delete 500 gigabytes?' And they would hit cancel and jot that down.
It sounds
So
less than intuitive.
you hit the wrong button, and like
Yeah,
suddenly you're kind of in deep doo doo.
if you have a Tourette's moment and you hit no or yes and you lost all of your media
Right.
just trying to take notes of how big your projects are.
Sounds like it's also very time consuming in a shop that has lots of projects.
Exactly. And so I think on that feature, being able to tell how big projects are.
And it does this as like a big scan you typically do when you first install the software, right? You go analyze my entire ISIS and every project and give me, because you guys have like cool little graphs. You guys
Yeah.
tell people about what duplicate files you have. That
Yes.
might be the
So
same exact file. You have orphaned files. Tell us about those kind of things and the value that that provides.
right. So with understanding those references, we know which project is using which media, okay? And then we go and look at the actual storage, what I would call a raw level, because Avid does look at the storage, and so we don't utilize Avid's tools like Media Tool, or if Interplay is involved, their indexer. We don't use their database to actually see what media files are there because, as we know, databases and index files can be incorrect or corrupted. So we rely on just, hey, what files are actually there? And so we go and look at each workspace and see which media files are there to compare it to the actual reference files from the project. So we know if, which project has, how many references there are, if there's media missing. Like you mentioned, duplicate files, we can tell if these files are duplicated and or orphan files. And by that, I mean media files that are on this storage, but there's no project reference to these files. So they're
Gotcha.
just sitting out there silting up that space. And
So it
we've
could be that could be throwaway takes or,
it could be it's a lot of times it's renders that weren't cleaned up
okay.
properly, or somebody goes to delete and there's an option within Avid to delete just the metadata and not actually the media files. And so if you delete the metadata, it's not going to know any more about that file,
But it's still
but the
there.
media file's there.
And
Yep.
those might
And
take up a lot of space, right? Haven't you gone into certain environments and there's
oh
like
yeah,
tons
there
of
was
orphans?
there was a news channel in Atlanta that we ran this index against or analysis against, and in their ingest workspace, we found over 8 terabytes of orphaned files, and
Wow.
90% of them were over a year old, so they haven't been referenced in over a year.
Did they trash them just to free up that
Well, what we
space?
did, because that's a large number, and so it kind of spooks
Sure.
me when you're thinking, is there something wrong with our configuration? But we actually, because they have Interplay as well, and we can go in through web services, Interplay's, third-party tool, to check Interplay's index to see if they know about these files. And Interplay didn't know about 90% of them, so we have this long list of orphan files. And so I told them, I said, hey, pick pick your biggest, largest 20 files from this list. See if you can find them yourself with all of your tools that you have within Avid. And if you find one that we are claiming as an orphan file, then I would say this is not a good reference of an indication of what's an orphan. And they go
You
away.
might want to save it and back all these up somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they go and they couldn't find any of them because we went and checked all of Avid's tools and against the list that we found, and there's no way to find those files unless you go to the actual file system and look and
Which is
somehow
not what you would normally do in an
no
Avid workflow.
it
Right.
would take years to do that. And so we started day two of them having the software of moving these files off. So it's essentially, we called it a sweep. It's a clever marketing term, but essentially it's a Windows move. And so we moved them off, and what they were going to do is put it off to second tier storage or even a tape, and basically label that tape, November 2014 orphan files. And so they actually have them on lower cost storage if somebody, squawks that they're missing media, which no one has. And so within a week of them having the software with our analysis tool, we were able to give them back 8 terabytes of ISIS storage.
And I mean, that's many, many thousands of dollars worth of storage when
Sure.
you look at the price per terabyte. But the question I have, Daniel, is are you ever worried that when you talk about sweeping away or trashing orphans, you're going to like trigger something in a potential customer who's actually an orphan?
Oh well, yeah. I've actually, that's part of my little sales speech when I go talk about orphans, and I always say I apologize.
You start off, you go, "Excuse me, sir.
Yeah,
Excuse
before
me,
we get into
ma'am.
this,
Do you happen to be an orphan?"
is your name Annie by chance? Because I'm gonna change my whole presentation if it's this. And so I don't,
I'm just seeing how it could get you in trouble if you weren't
yeah,
really.
yeah, because you picture a big broom chasing these little kids. It's not ideal. And if you run across, like you said, someone that was orphaned at an early age, it might not be the best thing.
So okay,
I haven't run across that yet.
or at least that they've told you. It's like those 50 sales you
Yeah,
didn't get if they
there's
were all
there's
orphans.
there's 20 opportunities that never purchased simply because of the orphan situation.
Anyway, so sequence parking. Do we want to talk about that a little bit,
because,
or
let's
talk
say
about
this.
the data moving part
So
of project
sequence
parking?
parking is different because project parking is really allowing you to look at what, Daniel? Both projects, which are the meta container, well, workspaces kind of, but the projects on workspaces, and then individual bins that are part of a project, and take, if I understand it correctly, both an entire project's worth of the media files across all of the bins in that project, or even on a bin by bin basis within a project, to basically move that stuff from the ISIS to another tier of disk storage, any other volume that the machine that's running project parking has mounted, whether it's a file share, a SAN volume,
Maybe a
local,
tape library cache
local
or something like
storage.
that.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly, a cache that's acting then as kind of the pathway to a tape
To a tape
archive.
library. Yeah, tape archive.
So
Right.
you've got that level of granularity, projects worth of files or bin level of files, and you just can bounce to and from and back and forth and boom, 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 boom. And it's just a really slick, easy way that's frankly much easier than moving these files around en masse than within Media Composer itself, using its own tools or doing it by digging through the file system specifically. Because there's really no database you're creating to keep track of this stuff. You're having to keep track of it all manually by keeping
Right.
notes, and we know how well that works or doesn't for people. So that's how project parking works. How is that different than sequence parking?
So sequence parking, and one thing to touch on to add to your very nice description of project parking. I'm
I'm
very
gunning for
impressed.
your job, actually.
I obviously making me nervous. I'm not going to play this to my UK friends, but so you can run project parking on a machine that's not an actual editor, and so the process of archiving and managing this space does not tie up the editor's resources, so they can just worry about using Media Composer, doing their creative thing.
So it could be another Windows desktop. It could be a
Yes.
Windows server that you had remote access
Right,
over.
and it could be a desktop that does a lot of other things. It's not CPU intensive. It's not going to
Maybe it's a person who is the media manager's workstation.
Sure.
Yes, yeah. So they're on Facebook or Snapchat, and then they got project parking running.
Wow,
as
you've
well.
got a high regard for media managers, I see.
No, I'm just teasing. Hopefully, there's nobody takes offense to that.
Oh,
but,
certainly none of our listeners are media managers,
No,
Daniel.
they wouldn't
I'm
be.
sure no one
They
who
wouldn't
deals
be.
with
I'm just
managing
speaking to
media
what I
listens
do.
to the workflow show.
So, sequence parking is, like you said, project parking is at the project and bin level of management. Sequence parking, where we actually have a tool that ties directly into the Media Composer. And so we had a lot of our customers that, we can, and we'll touch on Medway, I'm assuming shortly, but with Medway, we can take sequences and consolidate them out as a single file. And
You mean actually do the render and spit it out as
No,
a
we
media
wouldn't.
file?
Avid would do the render because they have their own effects, and we're not a render farm. But when it comes to taking all those clips and, when you go to export a file, maybe it's as a QuickTime or whatever via Avid. Avid does that he does its renders of its effects, but it also has to do with consolidation because there's multiple clips. It has to stitch them together
Sure.
and create a single file. So Medway can do that in the background and saving loads of time with that process.
But
And
but sequence parking.
but sequence parking, what that does is it takes the sequence and basically it creates a snapshot of the sequence. So it takes the effects, the media files, the metadata about all the media files and where they go. It exports the sequence, everything together, unrendered, not consolidated. So the sequence as it
The
is wraps
componentry, right? All of
the
the stuff you
componentry.
need to derive it, but still in a highly manipulatable format. You
Right.
still have handles on all the media files. You can still manipulate parameters of effects. Because really,
Right.
you'd be opening this up as a sequence in a bin with all of those settings associated with it in a non-rendered form.
So this me with my audio background, this sounds kind of like a very similar thing to like making an OMF or an AAF file to give to a. You're basically
Right.
consolidating everything into one file, but it's still got your sequence information, your handles, all
Right,
that stuff.
right. So yes, it grabs all the media files, all those OP atoms, puts it together into a bundled file, and puts it off to second tier storage. So you can say, okay, I'm done with this sequence today, but I may need to be able to lift an effect or change some things
Change
later.
a graphic, change a title.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you go to restore these sequences, it doesn't have to come back to the same editor. You can ship it off. You restore it,
Sure.
and you have all your media plus handles. You have all of your effects that are not rendered, so you can change some things. And so we really sequence parking when working with third-party media asset management companies. They really jumped on the idea. Send the media asset management a flattened file with metadata, but also that same sequence parked. And so you have the sequence as a flattened file, and then you have the sequence in a condition or format that, like I said, is able to be restored and manipulated.
Now, you kind of implied, is that actually triggered from within Media Composer, the editing software itself?
It is. It is. There's
So that's very different than Project Parking, which is a separate application on a separate machine.
right, right, and totally in the
Okay.
background. Sequence parking will actually there's two ways to trigger a sequence park or sequence export. We actually have a drain icon that can be configured to do this, and so there will be a client that runs on the actual editor. There will be a drain icon that's always on top because Avid paints the screen, but we have this little drain that you can drag your sequence.
I mean, you're talking like a literal drain.
Like, yeah, that
Like,
you would
we're going to
see
be
in a
sweeping
bathroom
these
tub.
orphans down the drain.
No, not orphans don't go down the
Oh,
drain.
okay.
These are yeah,
But you
And
really
so-
have
No, this
all
is
of
a
these
sequence. Yeah.
very sad imagery that's
yeah.
associated
Well, it's
with your
very
product.
dark and depressing.
I mean, the company's named after like getting kicked out of a bar after like probably starting a brawl. Someone died. Like someone died in that fight.
Hey, no lives were lost.
No lives were lost in
That's
the
the
creation of this company.
The official story, anyway.
So if you don't like the drain icon, which everyone does, but if you don't, if you're offended by it, we actually can do so within the Avid send to menu. So
And
you
that's
can
only available on Windows, the drain, right? Because Mac doesn't let you
yeah.
have
And
a
Mac,
little floating
right.
icon over everything.
Right.
right, Mac doesn't allow that, and so we have a send to menu option to
So
add.
is there a server component that this client-side application on the Media Composer workstations is talking to, and that server itself actually does this stuff, or is it all happening on the desktop level?
Recommended would be a server to take that load off
Got it.
the editor, but it can work.
So it's passing some sort of a command off to that server.
Yeah, it's
essentially.
basically what happens is it's an AAF reference file that gets exported and that describes all of the media. And our guys have figured out that AAF reference, and so they can go and grab the media in the background. So the server would have an Avid storage client connection software to be able to access the storage again. We go and grab the media and however it's been configured, we provide the output.
Does now, in the case of sequence parking, obviously project parking is very oriented around Avid's own storage platforms, but is sequence parking a little more agnostic, or is it also really for use in an ISIS environment?
I would say it's agnostic. We actually have it for Final Cut Pro as well.
Oh,
Okay.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, the goal was/is, it hasn't been finished, but to archive a sequence maybe in Avid and then restore that same sequence into Final Cut.
Ooh,
Interesting.
But we looked at that, and the reason why it wasn't finished because we have a product that's called bridging, and so instead of archiving and restoring with sequence bridging, you can go straight from Avid, Final Cut Pro 7, Adobe Premiere 7, and basically maybe you start in Final Cut Pro and you want to finish in Avid. You start a sequence.
Is that multi-directional? Can you really bounce
Yes.
between any of those in any direction?
You can.
So it's kind of like there used to be a thing called automatic duck. And it was
Right.
kind of discontinued because, at least at the time, the guy who wrote Automatic Duck got hired by Adobe.
Mm-hmm.
And that product line kind of went away, but you had to buy the individual components. I want to go from Avid Media Composer to Premiere, or from Media Composer to Final Cut 7. But
Yes.
bridging kind of sounds like a much more advanced version of that.
It
That-
is.
that-
It's
It's kind of just to go any direction between any of the supported products. That's pretty cool.
yeah, and it's a client server way of doing so. So it's background process, and
Nice.
so it works. It's basically both of sequence bridging and parking are subsets of Medway, and so a lot of our Medway customers are using these products within the Medway software to do these tasks, and so it's a nice little add.
Medway.
Medway.
I was about to.
What does Medway mean, Dan? Daniel?
I have a guess.
You should know by now.
Media Highway.
Yeah, look
There you
at
go.
you.
Very nice.
Yes,
I
it's
didn't
short
know what
from-
CatDV meant at one point. Like, I guessed that the DV meant digital video, but I was like,
Right.
what does this have to do with
with
felines?
kitty cat.
And and someone was like, catalog, you numbskull. And I was like, what does this have to do with the JCPenney catalog? And they were like, no, catalog as in database, which is what British people call databases.
Right.
And I was like, oh, and it was written by a British person.
Uh-huh.
My God. Okay, so Media Highway. We've gotten to the pinnacle
Mm,
of your life.
Flagship
is.
product.
it is.
You
It's-
live
it's-
for it.
I do. It's very intense. It's very workflow centric product.
So let me ask you this: if you have project parking and sequence parking and bridging, do you have Medway, or does Medway give you more than that?
Sequence bridging and sequence parking can be subsets of Medway. They can be their standalone products, or they can be all tied in with Medway.
Project parking is a different fork
Yeah,
of development.
different beast.
Got it.
Which, as I've told Daniel, I think, it would be cool if they could
Yes, it'd be cool. I know.
bridge these lines of code development. Wink,
Yeah,
wink.
I know. Well, those two developers don't get along, so it's not.
They get in fights at bars.
Yeah, lots of fights and bars and ejections and stuff like that. So
But they're pubs,
Medway,
actually.
you got it right. You win the prize. It's short for Media Highway, and so basically,
Is that like what Al Gore invented?
yes, it was just behind the internet. And so what Medway does is, with customers buying different products, maybe it's editing, maybe it's playout, maybe it's archiving from different companies.
Or a media asset management system?
Yes.
Mhm.
We like those.
Yeah, we
Yep.
do.
They're very nice. And so most of the time,
They're very nice.
very
It's
nice.
very nice.
I should have my picture as I dressed up as him for Halloween a couple years ago, and it was.
Oh, I could see that.
It's actually scary
I
how
caught a few minutes of that on TV the other day. I forgot just how
creepy.
intense an experience Borat is.
Yes, it is.
I mean, like,
one of my finer moments. Oh, it's good stuff. Very nice.
It's
So
very nice.
where were we? Medway. How that segued into Borat, I'll never know. But
That's just kind of how this audio podcast goes, Daniel.
yeah, I figured it would. So with these best of breed products, different products from different companies, there's struggles with file incompatibilities, repetitive, highly user interactive processes, and these processes need to be sped up and automated. And so what Medway can do is a lot of these different systems have different file formats and wrappers, and Medway can basically rewrap, transcode, and the media files back and forth again in the background. So the actual demo of the software is painfully boring because it's a progress bar, but what
That's
you
actually
don't
all it is.
it really is just
it's
a
just
progress
a
bar.
progress bar.
But when you look under the hood, some of the difficulties of rewrapping and
Well, 'cause
transcoding.
it's a
What's behind the
platform.
progress bar?
It's a platform, right? That's the thing. There's little bits of a GUI because, as you and I have talked about, to send things from Media Composer into Medway, thus to get it into some other system like a third-party MAM, a third-party archive platform, a third-party playout server. You might use the drain paradigm if you're on Windows, or the menu option on Windows, or again, as a Mac client, you're running that Medway client software that runs on your individual workstation but gives you the menu option to kind of publish back into Medway, let Medway do the actual rendering of the sequence on its own engine, and maybe give a copy of that unrendered version of the assets or whatever, and then pass that to the other system for whatever reason, including moving of the files, transcoding of the files, interpreting between the Avid quote-unquote metadata or project formats and the third-party metadata formats that you need to register something in. You guys might come up with something to talk to their APIs, their application programming interfaces, through the Medway servers. Is this all remotely, like reality?
All while
Yeah,
showing you a nice little progress bar, which is
Yeah,
really
it is.
like it's actually huge. Like it seems, you say it's boring, but like everybody wants that progress bar. It's huge.
It is, and with one of the when it's been around for several years, us being able to export down the drain. What editors like about it is it's almost like that shop on TV or whatever it was, set it and forget it. You drop it down the drain, and the idea was the dark and dreary idea was is you don't have to worry about the plumbing. We have workflows tied behind these drains where, let's say, this drain goes to play out, and they're done with, they know they send to play out, and they just drag their sequence onto the drain. It's an instantaneous process. They can actually shut down their system because they don't have to wait for Avid to do its consolidation and export. We can have a dialogue pop up if you want to add with your favorite media asset management company if you're sending files to that system and you want to add some metadata, because metadata is pretty important these days. I don't know if you're playing along there, but
Do you want to be able
big-
to find anything after you
yeah,
put it in
You
there?
want to know anything about its history
We're
and where it came
big
from?
believers in metadata,
Yes.
Daniel. Let me
Right.
tell you, we are so meta
Yeah,
that
I
we're
know,
like
I know that.
Well,
hovering above the entire world.
One of the things that we find is that a lot of our clients like to rely on the sort of file system hierarchy of folders and files and how they organize their folder
Which is
structure for
kind
their
of
projects.
one type of metadata.
It is one type of metadata. So when you ingest that into a MAM like Reach Engine or CatDV, that file system metadata becomes searchable metadata. So I would think in an Avid environment it would be even kind of more important, because you don't have control over the file system like you would
Right.
like you would with a Premiere workflow.
When you're exporting from an Avid environment, you're creating a new asset, and when you send it to a media asset management system, you need to have metadata that comes along with it. It just needs to happen. And who knows more about that asset than the editor when they've finished it. And so when you drag it on the drain, we can have a pop-up dialog that's completely customizable. So we can pull any of the Avid fields that describe those media files, and then we can have any fields that you want. I mean, if you want to put your dog's name or the editor's name or whatever added to this metadata about this new asset.
Name of the pub your father got thrown out of 25 years ago. Sorry.
We can make these fields required so that they can't export it without populating at least, a few things about the file.
Right.
And so that goes automatically into the MAM systems. They're looking for these metadata files, and they can say, oh, this file, this XML file that's very open and generic, well, here's the metadata. That means that there's a file going to be in location X, and they create a proxy, and you have all your information, and you have your files.
Now, it goes the other way too, right?
Right.
Let's say you have a third-party MAM, and that's where your assets first get ingested into, and it has its own proxies, and people are tagging things with metadata in the MAM. Describe a workflow where maybe you would send from that platform to Media Composer for editing purposes.
Absolutely. So you have all of these files, and you have a lot of our MAM vendors we work with have a proxy editing feature within it, and you can actually create a shot list or an edit decision list, as we like to call it, to where you've grabbed portions of these files and you want to send that to an Avid system or Final Cut Pro or Adobe for mastering. And what Medway will do is when you create that shot list and you hit a button within the media asset management world that says send to Avid, they'll actually generate metadata to describe the ins and outs of the clips that are referenced. We go and Medway goes and grabs the high res of each clip referenced, stitches it together, creates a sequence file for Avid, and sends it over to the Avid storage. And if Interplay, which is Interplay PAM, is involved, we can actually check those new assets into Interplay automatically.
Could it just be full clips as well, and it was just a collection of clips, not so much a sequence per se, but just references to clips?
Yeah, and what will happen is if it's just full clips like that, we'll actually still create a sequence because we're stubborn that way. But the sequence will come in describing the clips, and each individual clips will be brought into the bin.
Now, if your clips were in a format that was like a camera native format, but you wanted to turn them into the Avid Media Composer preferred format, which is again one of these MXFs of a certain type called an OP Atom, using their DNxHD codec, either at 145 or 220 or whatever the options are, it can also, as part of that process, generate those Avid native versions of the media files and have those be what get plopped onto the storage that the Avid editors have access to, correct?
Right. And you hit a large pain point that we're seeing in the industry is so many different camera ingest formats. I mean, they're continuously growing, and being able to take those files and transcode them into a Avid friendly or Final Cut or Adobe friendly format all in one fell swoop is very very efficient.
Well, there's like 15 that are alone that are camera formats that are based on MPEG-2, and another like 37 now that are based on H.264, and it's like there's a new one every other week, and it's like
and they're using
even the ones that are the same are like still slightly different depending on the camera.
Exactly. It's a pain in the ass, but it's also why we're around, because with so many different camera formats, there's also so many different platforms that content's being delivered to.
Well, and again, unlike some of the other editing platforms, Avid either doesn't allow you to use these native formats. They do have some plugins and a software system that's part of Media Composer called AMA, or Avid Media Access, that allows you to do editing of some camera native formats in their original form without turning them into DNxHD. But in general, it's not as preferred and as efficient in Media Composer. And so you don't get the same level of real-time previewing of effects, the same speed when rendering things. Avid's whole engine is still highly optimized around that DNxHD format wrapped as an OP Atom MXF file. And you guys are one of the few people on the market who speak that codec and wrapper format fluently, both to and from, which is a hugely valuable asset for these environments where this is the story of the day. Now, let me ask you this, and if you don't have the answer immediately available, but we talked earlier about how like ISIS storage is implicitly kind of split into many workspaces. How would you choose which workspace to spit either the original media files into or the newly generated DNxHD MXF OP files that was part of this like send from MAM into Avid storage workflow? Like where is Medway talking? How is it getting that list of workspaces?
That's a great question, Nick. I'm glad that you asked it. I very appreciate this. But no, there's a few ways that we could handle this. One is a manual way, which, saying that word manual is never super positive. But if you created a shot list that you wanted to send to a workspace, we can actually provide a list of workspaces that you could then take within our interface, our progress bar interface. It has a source and a destination side on it. So on the left is your source. So we would see a list of your EDLs or edit decision lists from the MAM, and you could simply drag and drop to your desired workspace. Another way of doing it is putting some automation behind that, and we could have essentially watch folders for each workspace. And within the MAM, you would have a button that would say, send to Avid, and then you could have a kind of a drop down workspace, X, Y, or Z.
Would
so
you
it's just a sort of a
probably-
watch folder based system where the files would be
I
moved
mean, you
into
can,
okay.
starting out with most of our MAMs, that's what we do because it's just easier.
It's easier to
and
configure.
It's
I
very,
imagine.
very efficient. But
Do
we
you
have
have to manually like tweak those config files if you create a new workspace, or can it kind of pull the full set of existing workspaces on the fly and keep that list updated?
it would be a manual process.
Okay. Well, it seems like, with all that stuff and, how this ties into conversations that you and I have been having, Daniel, that Chesapeake and you guys and maybe some third-party solutions, we might have some interesting stuff to show off, perhaps in the maybe NAB time frame if we can get our stuff together. I think that's what we're talking about. Can't tilt our hands now too much, but I know that us and you guys are very anxious to kind of give some real-world examples of this.
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
again, we're a very multi-platform organization, and this just feeds right into giving users the choice to have Avid, which is still very much kind of heavily involved in even some of the highest ends of editorial work that's being done. I mean, it still is the editing software most major theatrical productions are done in, much of broadcast television, et cetera, et cetera. But this set of capabilities really offers people who are oriented around that platform just a lot of other options than taking that totally vertical approach with Media Composer. So this is really cool. And again, we may have some interesting things to start showing off relatively soon, or at least hopefully by NAB. So tell us kind of what's been new, what's kind of taking a lot of the development resources, and maybe where things are going a little bit before we let you go today.
All right. With Medway, or with that technology, as you know, we can move. We understand the Avid world quite well, as we've discussed for a little bit now, and as a lot of our customers are adopting new workflows, potentially with Premiere, we've developed a Premiere panel that enables you to utilize Avid Interplay and Avid Storage for edit in place. And so with Adobe Premiere, you can actually, and the Marquis panel, which I don't have a proper name for it yet, but you can actually search Interplay, request an AAF within the panel within Premiere, and so we'll actually be able to edit in place the Avid MXF OP Atom files on the Premiere. And so those customers with Avid Interplay, most of them already have Premiere just because they have the Adobe package and Premiere comes with that. And
or
so
they may have another work group that's like the promo work group or the graphics guys who do a little bit of Premiere work.
Right, and so they can easily with this panel look into the Avid world and get what they need, not having to go through, call the Avid guys or the media manager and bug them. They can say, hey, I can just edit in place And then once they're finished editing, maybe it's with the Avid files and some of their own, they can actually, within the same panel, publish back to ICEs if they want and create a new asset and check it back into Interplay. Or they can publish to Playout server or to archive or whatever they want to do, and add metadata and tie it in with the MAM system as well.
You know what this all reminds me of?
Is it a song?
Well, it is, actually.
I thought it might be.
Well, I was first thinking of Kumbaya and like how this is really like the workflow version of just everybody, no matter
Playing
your
nicely together.
race or your creed, getting together and holding hands and singing Kumbaya. But
Yeah.
then, even more so, what was that like 1980s Coke commercial where
With
it's
Willie
like,
Nelson,
it was like everyone like on a hilltop holding hands.
We Are the World.
It wasn't We Are the World, but that's kind of like this
You were-
too.
You Were Always on My Mind by
What
Willie
was
Nelson.
what was the song in the Coke ad? It was like, if I could teach the world to sing, blah 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 blah.
Makes you
blah,
want
blah.
to skip and smile.
I mean, you know, you guys are like the workflow version of that, just harmonious.
I'm gonna have
World.
to look this up. Yes, that's
You're
good.
kind of like Utopia of workflow.
Mm,
You like that?
I do.
That's what you could call that new product. Utopia.
We were thinking about calling it Nick Gold's panel.
I like that even
good.
more. I mean, it's really kind of one and the same.
Yes.
You know, Utopia and
Isn't
Nick
that
Gold.
your middle name, Utopia?
Nick Utopia Gold. Yes, it is.
I can think of
Daniel.
a dozen other nicknames you probably
Yeah,
have too.
yeah. So,
All right, let's cut
so
that
that's,
off right
that's,
there.
yeah, that's new in the Medway technology world. And then with Project Parking, we've added an addition or even a second product to really become. And I know there's backup softwares out there, but an ISIS backup tool, right? That it runs on a server, it backs media and metadata up at a workspace level. And the kicker point of this is having the Project Parking intelligent restore. And so you have your backup of your workspaces and your project files, removing any duplication that there might be with other software. And then let's say the worst happens, you lose your ISIS in a storm of some sort or an earthquake. I don't know what it might be, but or just a power failure.
A flood,
And yes.
Godzilla,
Yeah. Yeah, we don't want that. Like back in '92, Godzilla came to
kaiju
town.
monster attack.
Yes, and so
Nashville wiped off map. Ha ha ha.
Actually, that happened.
and
that
so
happened
you've
a while
lost your
ago.
ISIS, but you have workspaces with workspace parking or whatever the name is. You can actually pull back individual bins and projects to your individual workspace and start working
So
straight
you can
away.
start working
versus
on the stuff
if-
you were just working on when the disaster
Yes,
happened.
yes,
Right.
because there was a company that had, an ISIS backup on tape. It was as a Danish radio station actually, and they would, okay, let's do the disaster recovery test, and they said the good news is the files coming off the tape, or it was a Danish news station. The files coming off tape are good, they're usable. The bad news is it's going to take us 2 weeks to get everything back. And so it's a news station. In 2 weeks, that media is going to be irrelevant. So it's not an ideal. It's a good backup, but
Sure.
the restore process is terrible.
Well, and that's, people don't think about that
Yeah, I
enough
was
when
just
it
gonna
comes to
say,
backups.
that
Like,
is-
it's the business continuity planning that's just as important as like saying, oh yeah, we've got a system backing things up.
We
because
very frequently have the discussion with clients about like how much money they're willing to invest in a backup system, and they kind of think of it as, oh well, whatever's the cheapest. Not all the time, but that's what are our price options, and our response is, well, what's your business continuity look like? I mean, how long could you be down if you lost your primary
because it's
storage?
like we say, for instance, data tape is a really good disaster recovery backup system from the perspective that it's very easily transportable off-site to a separate geographical location. Because when Godzilla
Exactly.
walks through your primary production facility and steps on your SAN, your ISIS,
Right.
And, it's like, remember Bambi meets Godzilla, where like the
Yes.
foot lands on Bambi? Well,
Absolutely.
imagine that's your lead editor and not Bambi. And they're
No.
like,
How about your ISIS?
or your ISIS, or probably all of the above.
Could
Godzilla
be.
has pretty
Yes,
big feet.
That's true.
It's like, well, okay, great. You have a copy in another geographic location, but how long is it going to take to get stuff back from tape and get those tapes in your facility or get them in a new facility?
Yep.
For people who need business continuity and quickly get back up and running, but short of your facility getting stepped on by Godzilla or a flood or a fire or whatever, you might want just a disk-to-disk replication system.
So it sounds like that's what we're kind of talking about here.
So it would be great if you could use this to prioritize, let's get back those immediate projects that we were just working on.
Yeah.
And then we can kind of be a little more leisurely at bringing everything back online to our production volume once it's fully up and running and everything. So, yeah, that sounds really useful from a business continuity planning perspective.
Right, and we've had customers and resellers tell us, because ICEs are most of the time mirrored, right? And so if you get this backup and you feel confident in it, as we do, could you restripe your ISIS? I don't know. It's a pretty interesting thought, because then you would gain 30% of your more storage
right.
on the ISIS. So
a lot of different stuff you guys are up to.
Yeah.
Avid Workflow Utopiaville.
That's where I live. Mailing address.
And you're like the only one there. It's like you dropped on an island.
I know. It's very lonely.
There's not too many people in Avid Workflow Utopiaville. No. But there would be if they were more engaged with you guys through your wonderful integration reseller partner, Chesapeake Systems, of course.
That's right.
I think this is the breakout year for really
starting with this podcast.
Bringing more people into Utopia.
Yes.
Cool,
yes,
man.
indeed.
Well, listen, thank you kindly for being our guest today.
Yes, thank you.
This has been fantastic. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be very interested in this, given there's really such a vacuum for information when it comes to melding Avid stuff together with anything else. It seems to be a very big black box, and the thing is, you guys have the boxes to make that work. So thank you, Daniel. If obviously anyone has questions about just taking a look at your stuff, you guys have a lot of really good demo videos up. Where can they go to learn more? Obviously, in addition to talking to us here at Chesapeake.
Yeah, talking to you guys first, but our website is marquisbroadcast.com, and there, like you said, you could see videos of specific features of products, not the whole product itself, but
it's great. You guys have done some great and again, that's MARQUIS broadcast.com.
Yep.
That's correct.
And listen, well, we will see you soon, I'm sure. We bump into each other regularly enough. And if anyone needs like actual in-person demos, you are obviously available to help us out, so they can reach out to us and we can put them in touch with you when it comes to any of this stuff. Or even
Absolutely.
Questions. I've just found that the guys at Marquis frankly know the Avid ecosystem and its ins and outs better than most people at Avid. So they are a tremendous resource if you're having any workflow issues of that nature. Well, thanks again, Daniel. And this has been another episode of The Workflow Show. Thank you, Mr. Whetstone.
Thank you, Mr. Gold.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. Take care.
Thank you.
The Workflow Show is a production of Chesapeake Systems. We welcome your comments and suggestions for upcoming episodes. You can email us at workflowshow@chesa.com. That's workflowshow@chesa.com. And if you'd like to talk with a member of our team of experts about your particular digital media workflow needs, email us at prosales@chesa.com. That's prosales@chesa.com.